A scorching Kalahari morning, the sun barely cresting the dunes, and an elder of the Sand People, his face a road map of seasons etched by the wind and light, kneels in the rust-colored sand. He doesn't need a map or a compass. His guide is memory, a library of knowledge passed down through whispers, stories, and shared experience across hundreds of generations. He points a steady, weathered finger towards a gnarled, spiky plant, almost indistinguishable from the other hardy succulents dotting the arid landscape. This is Hoba, as it's known in the sand languages. To the outside world, it is Hoodia gordonii. For the sand, it is life. For millennia, they have held its secret. Chew the bitter, fleshy stem, and the gnawing pangs of hunger simply vanish. This wasn't a casual snack. It was a profound survival tool, a biological key that unlocked the ability to endure in one of Earth's most unforgiving environments. On long, arduous hunting expeditions that could last for days under a relentless sun, a piece of Hoodia was more valuable than a full meal. It allowed a hunter to maintain focus, to track prey with unwavering patience, to conserve energy when there was none to spare. It quelled not just the ache in the stomach, but the anxiety of scarcity, providing a quiet confidence that the body could persist. This knowledge was not written in books or filed in archives. It was embodied. It lived in the stories told around the fire, in the practical lessons taught to children, in the very rhythm of their hunter-gatherer existence. The understanding of Hoodia was inextricably woven into their culture, a piece of what scholars now call traditional ecological knowledge, or tech. This wasn't just knowing the plant worked, it was knowing to use it. Which part of the plant to harvest, at what time of year, how to prepare it to minimize its intense bitterness, and how to respect the plant to ensure its continued growth for future generations. This was a holistic, symbiotic relationship between a people and their environment. The concept of owning this knowledge would have been as alien to the sand as the idea of owning the air or the sunlight. It was a communal resource, a shared inheritance, a gift from the land to be stewarded, not hoarded. It was an expression of their identity, a testament to their resilience and their deep, intuitive understanding of the Kalahari's complex ecosystem. The sun barely cresting the dunes, this scene of ancient wisdom being practiced was a daily, unremarkable occurrence, a quiet miracle of human adaptation. But outside this bubble of ancient tradition, the world was blind to it. In the air-conditioned laboratories of the West, scientists were searching for miracle cures, for silver bullets to solve modern problems like obesity, a condition born of excess that was the polar opposite of the sand's reality. They looked to complex chemical synthesis, to genetic engineering, to high-tech solutions costing billions. The idea that a solution might already exist, held in the collective memory of a people, often dismissed as primitive, was simply not part of the dominant scientific paradigm. This wasn't a malicious oversight, not at first. It was a systemic blind spot, a form of intellectual arrogance that assumes all valuable knowledge is generated within the sterile, controlled confines of a modern lab. The sand's wisdom was seen as folklore, not data. Their millennia of lived experience was anecdote, not evidence. This vast, unwritten encyclopedia of botanical and ecological knowledge remained invisible, a ghost haunting the edges of a world obsessed with patents, publications, and profits. The global pharmaceutical industry, a multi-trillion-dollar behemoth, was spending fortunes trying to invent a key, while the sand had been holding it in their hands all along, using it simply to open the door to the next day. The contrast is staggering. One world struggling with the consequences of too much, the other possessing the elegant solution born from having just enough. The plant and the knowledge of its power sat there in the desert sun, a secret hiding in plain sight. But secrets like this, especially those with the potential for immense profit, rarely stay secret forever. The question was never the outside world would find it, but when. Who would be the one to discover this ancient secret next, and at what devastating cost to its original keepers? Following that ancient, unwritten wisdom, the first whispers began to leak from the Kalahari into the world of Western science. It wasn't a sudden revelation, but a slow process of observation and appropriation. In 1963, scientists from South Africa's Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, a state-funded institution, were documenting the indigenous flora of the region. They noted the Sand people's use of Hoodia gordonii. It was an anthropological curiosity, a footnote in a botanical survey. But the observation lingered. They saw firsthand how the sand hunters could go for days without food after chewing the plant. This was not folklore. This was a repeatable, observable, physiological phenomenon. The CSIR took samples. Back in their Pretoria laboratory, far from the heat and dust of the desert, they began the methodical process of deconstruction. They fed extracts of the plant to lab animals and confirmed the powerful appetite-suppressing effect. The hunt was on, not for food, but for a single molecule. For over 30 years, the research continued quietly, a slow-burn project within the institution. Finally, in 1996, the breakthrough came. A team of CSIR chemists successfully isolated the active compound, a previously unknown steroidal glycoside. They named it P57. This was the moment the story pivoted from ethnobotany to intellectual property. With the P57 molecule identified, the CSIR did what Western scientific and commercial institutions are designed to do. They filed a patent. In 1997, they were granted a patent in South Africa and subsequently in the United States and Europe for P57 as an appetite suppressant. Let's pause and examine this act. The patent application did not list generations of sand hunters as co-inventors. It did not acknowledge the millennia of observation, trial, and error that had identified this specific plant among thousands and its specific use. The patent claimed the invention of P57's application, framing it as a novel discovery made in a laboratory. The traditional knowledge that served as the direct and indispensable roadmap for this discovery was rendered invisible, legally and financially erased from the record. The desert secret, once a communal lifeline held in trust, was now a piece of private, state-owned intellectual property, enclosed by legal fences and ready for sale. The buyer came quickly. The global market for weight loss drugs was and is a colossal industry. In 1997, the British biotech company Phytopharm licensed the development rights from the CSIR. A year later, in 1998, the pharmaceutical giant Pfizer, the maker of Viagra, saw an even bigger opportunity. They sublicensed the rights from Phytopharm for a staggering $21 million, plus future royalties on sales. The media went into a frenzy. Here was the Holy Grail, a natural, plant-based diet pill that could trick the brain into feeling full. Pfizer projected that a successful Hoodia-based drug could generate annual revenues in the billions. Their press releases spoke of cutting-edge science and a revolutionary new weapon in the war on obesity. In this triumphant corporate narrative, the Sand people were completely absent. They were not partners, not beneficiaries, not even footnotes. They were ghosts. The knowledge they had nurtured was now a commodity, its value soaring on the New York Stock Exchange, while the Sand themselves remained one of the most impoverished and marginalized communities in Southern Africa. How could a system be so perfectly designed to reward the discoverer but erase the originator? How could knowledge, freely given and cultivated over generations, so swiftly and completely become the private property of a corporation half a world away? The buyer came quickly. The global market for weight loss drugs was and is a colossal industry. In 1997, the British biotech company Phytopharm licensed the development rights from the CSIR. A year later, in 1998, the pharmaceutical giant Pfizer, the maker of Viagra, saw an even bigger opportunity. They sublicensed the rights from Phytopharm for a staggering $21 million, plus future royalties on sales. The media went into a frenzy. Here was the Holy Grail, a natural, plant-based diet pill that could trick the brain into feeling full. Pfizer projected that a successful Hoodia-based drug could generate annual revenues in the billions. Their press releases spoke of cutting-edge science and a revolutionary new weapon in the war on obesity. In this triumphant corporate narrative, the Sand People were completely absent. They were not partners, not beneficiaries, not even footnotes. They were ghosts. The knowledge they had nurtured was now a commodity, its value soaring on the New York Stock Exchange, while the Sand themselves remained one of the most impoverished and marginalized communities in Southern Africa. How could a system be so perfectly designed to reward the discoverer but erase the originator? How could knowledge, freely given and cultivated over generations, so swiftly and completely become the private property of a corporation half a world away? That question, simmering in the background, finally ignited a global storm of outrage. The answer to how the San were erased was simple. Nobody asked them. But they were not going to remain silent. As news of Pfizer's billion-dollar projections broke in the international press around the year 2001, the story of the San's role began to surface, thanks to the work of journalists and activists. The term biopiracy, the act of appropriating indigenous knowledge about nature for profit without permission or compensation, entered the mainstream conversation, and the Hoodia case became its poster child. The San people, long fragmented and dispossessed of their ancestral lands, began to organize. Represented by the South African San Council and guided by a tenacious human rights lawyer named Roger Channels, they mounted a campaign to reclaim their heritage. This was not just a lawsuit, it was a fight for their identity. It was a declaration that their knowledge was not a free-for-all resource to be plundered, but a cultural treasure with inherent worth. Their argument was powerful and just. If P57 was the lock, their traditional knowledge was the key. Without their key, the CSIR and Pfizer would still be fumbling in the dark. Therefore, they were entitled to a fair and equitable share of the benefits derived from it. This fight for recognition tapped into a growing international movement for indigenous rights. The San's lawyers didn't just appeal to morality. They leveraged international law, specifically the 1992 United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. The CBD was a landmark treaty that, for the first time, formally recognized the sovereignty of nations over their genetic resources and, crucially, enshrined the principle of fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the use of traditional knowledge. The San's case became a critical test. Could these lofty international principles actually be enforced against a state-backed scientific body and a multinational pharmaceutical corporation? The pressure mounted. The CSIR, initially defensive and claiming their actions were legal at the time, faced a public relations nightmare. Pfizer, wary of being branded a biopirate, began to distance itself. After years of intense negotiations, advocacy, and international scrutiny, a breakthrough occurred. In March 2003, a landmark benefit-sharing agreement was signed. The San people, recognized as the original holders of the knowledge, would receive a percentage of all milestone payments the CSIR received from its licensees, as well as a share of any future royalties if a drug ever made it to market. It was a historic victory. The fundamental right to their intellectual heritage was now legally codified in a binding agreement. In an ironic twist of fate, the billion-dollar diet pill never materialized. Pfizer returned the rights in 2003, citing difficulties in synthesizing P57 and concerns about potential side effects on the liver. Unilever later picked up the project for a food product but also abandoned it in 2008. The miracle cure proved to be more complex and hazardous than anticipated. Yet, the failure of the drug does not diminish the magnitude of the San's victory. The true legacy of their struggle was not a share in profits that never came, but the powerful legal and ethical precedent they established. They proved that an indigenous community, armed with justice and international support, could challenge the giants of science and industry and win. Their fight sent a clear message across the globe. The era of consequence-free biopiracy was ending. The Hoodia Agreement became a model for access and benefit-sharing protocols worldwide, influencing the later Nagoya Protocol, which further strengthened these rights. It forced corporations and research institutions to rethink their ethical obligations, reminding us all that the true cost of discovery is rarely paid up front, and that justice, like the Hoodia plant itself, can sometimes grow and flourish in the most unlikely of places.